Now, Joe Rogan is a really smart guy. Apart from hosting his own podcast, he also works as a part-time commentator at the UFC, so you'd naturally expect him to be pretty vocal about the promotion's issues. Just recently, he was talking about how the UFC should score fights. He came up with some pretty notable enhancements, but the only drawback? They already exist. Keep watching this video as we tell you everything about Rogan's embarrassing moment. First up, thanks Joe. The way fights are scored at the UFC has always been a really controversial topic, and the fact that complaints regarding decisions keep on piling up just means there might actually be an issue. Remember UFC 55, Holly Holmes versus Ketlin Vieira? Even though Holmes managed to outstrike Vieira in every single round but the first, the latter still walked away with a split decision victory. The most probable consensus here was that Vieira landed two extremely damaging blows on two separate occasions of the fight, but a majority of the MMA community has been arguing that Holmes was the more dominant fighter and should have walked out as the victor. And in the last episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, Rogan was speaking to the current UFC bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling, who also came under a lot of fire for his controversial split decision win against Petr Yan at UFC 273. Joe commented on how the UFC should try making scoring simple and focus on two major components: damage and control. Every time a fighter lands a brutal kick or punch, they should get points for damage. You'd also get points for control, but they obviously won't be worth as much as damage, which does make sense. Because at the end of the day, a fighter could survive control for the entire fight, but a few damaging blows and it's game over. So what Joe is really saying is that think of UFC fighters like characters in Tekken or Street Fighter. Every time they take a hit, they lose some points from their health bar. And in case both of the fighters manage to survive the entire fight, whoever has the most points left gets the win. Honestly speaking, it's a pretty good system to score fights, but the only problem here is that this is exactly the way fights are scored. Yep, whatever Joe said was put in place back in 2016 by the Association of Boxing Commissions. Poor Joe, he probably thought he was onto something huge. And what's even more funny is that Aljamain was just nodding away at everything Joe was saying. That just means even as a UFC fighter, he has no idea how fights are scored. So let's discuss the real problem. Now here's what we think. The real problem isn't the way how fights are scored, it's a matter of understanding what the criteria exactly reads. And honestly speaking, Rogan did a pretty good job at dumbing things down for us to understand. As per the official rules, effective striking and grappling is always considered as a priority when giving a judgment. What effective striking and grappling really means here is damage. And just in case the judges are unable to see any advantages in damage done, then they move on to what's called Plan B. In fancy words, Plan B is effective aggressiveness, or like what Joe said, control. But this still doesn't make things any less embarrassing for Rogan. It's exactly the same thing he came up with. And we'll give Rogan the benefit of the doubt here. He doesn't fight in the UFC, so he might not be 100% familiar with the rules. But what in the world was Aljamain doing just sitting there nodding? Anyway, all we think is that the UFC needs to make sure both fighters and fans understand what the official rules read. Because looking back at the UFC 55 drama, Vieira did technically deserve the victory. She did way more damage than her opponent. And now, it's not what you see on TV. Let's get one thing out of the way. The fight you see on the TV is not necessarily the fight that took place. You can't really gauge the impact of a punch or kick through the TV. Sometimes what seems like an average punch has a crazy impact. And we're sure you've seen fights in which it looks like a fighter is taking a barbaric beating, but in reality, he's just negating what's being fired at him. But this isn't the case in every decision. Sometimes the officials are just inefficient and patchy, and you can't really work around that. They're either not on the same page or they're using a completely different system to score the fight, a system they've built inside their head. Frankly speaking, the whole judging system needs a revamp. The damage and control system wasn't particularly made for MMA. It's almost like a hybrid system which helps officials judge boxing and MMA. And if you ask us, it's better suited for boxing instead of the UFC. Anyway, if we were in charge of setting the rules, we'd just make one tiny tweak and everything would work perfectly. All you need to do is add a crowd pleaser effect. We're pretty sure the majority of UFC fans don't know how fights are scored, and they probably don't want to know either. But what they're more interested in are flashy combinations and big takedowns. The scoring system should also include points for these, so the final decision is more in line with what the fans think about the fight. Next, in other related news, we have the Give Me the Money fight. Thank God someone finally said it. Charles Oliveira, the uncrowned king of the lightweight division, has finally expressed interest in a money fight against Conor McGregor. See, unlike most guys, Oliveira isn't making up some petty excuse about wanting to end McGregor's career, or, he's not out there to teach him a lesson. He knows McGregor is the money fight, and that's all he's after for now. At least the Brazilian is honest and knows what he wants. We have to give him that much. Charles has also broken silence on the constant callouts by Habib-endorsed Islam Makhachev. The former lightweight champion of the UFC thinks that Islam hasn't done enough to get a fight. And it isn't like Charles doesn't think Islam isn't a tough guy or something. He actually thinks Islam is a really good fighter. But when it comes to fighting big names, the Russian still needs to do some work. That 22-1 MMA record is good for nothing when all you fought are a bunch of nobodies or has-beens. Anyways, things will only get exciting from here. If Charles versus Conor actually happens, it'll be a really interesting match. Because if the Notorious is able to squeeze a victory, guess who gets a shot at the lightweight title of the world? Now for channeling his boxing roots. Things are starting to get pretty serious as Francis Ngannou gets ready to channel his boxing roots and take on the Gypsy King in a crossover bout later this year or in 2023. And while there's a lot of speculation on who's going to win the fight, we're still a bit hung up on the rules. Is it going to be purely boxing? Because then it would be unfair to Ngannou. But if the rules include kicking or grabbing, then it's pretty much over for Fury. So what sort of rules are we looking at here? UFC heavyweight Tom Aspinall came up with his own set of rules that will sort of even the playing field for both fighters. Aspinall thinks the rules should allow low kicks in between each round of the fight. For example, in the first round, both fighters would have to box it out. Advantage, Tyson Fury. And in the second round, the boxing rules will stay the same, but both fighters will also have the option of throwing some low kicks. Advantage, Francis Ngannou. It isn't exactly a bad suggestion, but if you think about it, it sort of makes things difficult for Fury. He's never gotten kicked in his entire life, and a kick coming from the Predator will probably have him limping in no time. And lastly, talk about a legacy. Remember the Ukrainian Askar Mozharov we told you about? The guy with a huge tattoo on his chest very similar to McGregor's. Well, the UFC has parted ways with him for fabricating his record. And what's surprising is that he actually made his record worse than better. If you're gonna cheat, at least do it so it's in your favor. But anyway, talk about a legacy. Fired before even getting a single fight. But this is way bigger than it seems. The fact that Askar Mozharov, aka Cosplay McGregor, was able to first delete and enter a new record in the fighter's database just makes things a whole lot more controversial. Did he have any aides? Was someone in the UFC helping him change his record? We don't know yet, but the promotion has definitely made the right move in letting him go. That's it from our side, folks. So what do you think? Are we going to be seeing some memes on Joe Rogan after this mix-up? Did you know how fights are scored at the UFC? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Remember, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exciting videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.